we talked about the gross national confidence factor. I think that's what Senator Lieberman said. It's true. You know, when you are presented with arguments like that, people are losing confidence in their government. But they still expect things to be done by their government. And looking at the beginning of every year, the Pew Research Center does a poll of saying, what do you want your Congress to focus on this legislative cycle? And on the right-hand side, it was the economy, no doubt. In the middle of it was energy. And what was dead last? Climate change. Well, after the oil spill, they said, we better go out and do this again and just see, you know, what has moved. And looking at what Congress is debating right now, what do you want them to be focusing on? Well, interestingly, jobs were still number one. Energy was number two. What was still dead last? Climate change. And what did the Congress try and act on? Climate change. And so they've lost, you know, the American public is over here. We're concerned about the environment. We're concerned about the economy. We're concerned about jobs. We're concerned about the deficit. And these guys are over here spending money and spending a lot of time on climate change legislation. So, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of our energy policy going forward? And where we have really been trying to focus the minds of legislators and policymakers in the White House is stop picking winners and losers. We talked about that earlier in the previous panel, because government's not very good at that. The reality is, our energy reality is that we will need everything: oil, gas, coal, and increasingly cleaner coal, nuclear, renewables. We need an infrastructure. We need to get beyond that banana syndrome, the nope syndrome, not on planet Earth. The nope syndrome, everybody's nope to everything. We need to get beyond that so we can get some infrastructure built so that we can be competitive and get America back to work. And I was so pleased the Center for Energy Workforce Development was here, because, you know, it's incredible that we are graduating fewer and fewer engineers every year. And China is graduating more and more engineers. Now, this is not an us versus China thing. I don't think like that at all, but it's true. Now, we have high-quality academic institutions, but we haven't pulled those people into these educational opportunities, and we have a big problem. We also have a big problem with skilled labor in some of these areas. You know, a major capital project starts 16% short on labor, and that just means that it becomes more expensive, and these projects take longer to do. So we really need to be focused on people power, getting people into the education system and making sure they've got opportunities matched up with where they are in the energy sector. And then last but not least, we need to be investing in technology. We are investing today, absent the stimulus package, less today than we did after the Arab oil embargo in clean energy research and development. So we really need to be looking at the partnerships between the government and the private sector, strengthening them, incentivizing that research so that we have the innovations, we have the technologies for the energy of tomorrow. And we're not doing that in the type of way that needs to be done. And we're certainly running behind in terms of how we are looking at integrating technology in the private sector into the longer-term energy vision of our country. So as my last slide, what do we really have right now, I think, of the picture? The picture is that we've got the policymakers going in one direction and the American people going in another direction. And I think that provides a huge opportunity rather than a problem. Because what fills this space in here is the business community, is you all. And that it's an opportunity for us to close that gap and be leaders and bring the politicians back to where they need to be and bring the public over here to making some harder choices. Because fundamentally, it's not going to be here or here, it's going to be in here. And I think that's where the private sector really comes into play. We have been at the forefront. The private sector always has, in any crisis in our country, been the ones to innovate our ways out of it. And that's where we are today. And to helping policymakers and politicians in a very polarized environment make some very difficult decisions, because we're going to have to make them in the next couple of years, and they're going to be with us for decades to come. These energy decisions don't go away. These are long-term capital commitments and projects that need a long-term horizon to be profitable. If we don't have that type of environment, that money won't be invested here. And capital, as you all know, is a coward. It will go where it can be comfortable. And right now, it is not comfortable here. CEOs around the nation have made that decision loud and clear by keeping their capital at home, in their companies. They're not investing. They're not hiring because of all this uncertainty. And so that's what we really need to take off. And what do we really need to know is what is ultimately the role of government versus the private sector in this? We're seeing a big growth of government right now. Is that the right balance? Are we going to be competitive going forward with that type of a balance? And last but not least, I think that we need to be encouraging much more transparent discussion amongst policymakers, the business community, its consumers. And you listen to utilities and them wanting to be more transparent about prices. with their consumers. We should be demanding the same of our political system, particularly in the energy and climate area, because as we all know, these have long, long implications for many years to come. So if you're interested in being part of this discussion, which you already are because you're having this great conference and you're in the business to begin with, take a look at our website. There's lots of different things on there and ways to get involved and write your congressman or write your senator or get on talk radio or read an op-ed or pen an op-ed or do whatever, because we've got to raise the national awareness that this is an issue we need action on. And we don't want it driven by inside the Beltway politics. It's too important for your bottom line. It's too important for your consumers. It's too important for your families and your future for it to be left to just inside the Beltway. So that's why we're out on the stump. We're going to 30 states over the course of this, by the end of this year. And I tell you, the one thing that is amazing is to hear everybody wanting to be part of the solution. They're tired of Washington being the problem. And so I think it's time we turn the tables and say, we are the solution. Now get out of the way, and here's what we think we need you to do. So thank you all very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Let me start with your last statement, which was, get out of the way, here's what we think we need to do. You've posed a number of items here in terms of what should be done. If you were to prioritize them, what are the most important things that we should be doing?
We are facing, in all parts of the energy space, a regulatory tsunami, whether it is on restraining the ability of conventional oil and gas producers to explore, whether it is constraining the ability of a wind farm to get built because they can't get through the permitting process, or whether you are in the natural gas area and you want to build a new pipeline from Canada here or across the country to fuel the Northeast. They can't get the permits they need. We've got to get serious about streamlining some of the regulations. Regulations are there for good reason, but we are on a regulatory feeding frenzy, adding layer upon layer upon layer of regulation that is just impossible to manage and to navigate. It's at the local area, then it's at the local level, then it's at the state level, then it's at the federal level. And it makes every single way that we're doing business more expensive and less timely and less relevant in a competitive world. So our message has been, we really need to streamline, we need to get serious. Let's put the regulations in place that we actually really, really need, not try and satisfy every single constituency through regulation.
Along those same lines, it's increasingly difficult to buy things made in America. We've already seen this in clothing, shoes, electronics, automobiles. In the energy sector, we're seeing increased market share for solar, alternative manufactured goods from China and other countries. What can be done to stem the tide of offshoring our manufacturing sector in the energy area?
That's a great question, and it is stunning when you think of a lot of the technologies. A lot of the technology, renewable technology, was developed here, but is now being manufactured elsewhere. A couple of things. First of all, we should have a sustainable policy on renewables so that they actually have and they know what the production tax credit or investment tax credit is going to look like. We've suggested that we have an 8-year window so that people understand what it's going to be rather than relying on Congress to turn it on and off. We should have manufacturing tax credits. But importantly, there's things that we can do that actually don't cost any money, because remember, we are floating in debt. Around the world, there are very, very high tariffs on clean energy goods and services. And so while we may or may not have a Doha round of trade negotiations be successful, everybody wants to have cleaner energy. And so we should have a unilateral agreement, us and the Europeans and the developing countries, that we're just going to eliminate all tariffs on clean energy goods and services. That would immediately hugely expand the market, which would bring down the cost because, as we all know, a lot of these technologies are still far more expensive than other conventional technologies. And it would provide that push that wouldn't cost any of us any money, frankly.
Do the cost estimates for Waxman-Markey represent costs in addition to the costs that Connecticut currently experiences due to RGGI?
Yes.
Put another way, would Waxman-Markey load additional costs onto Connecticut?
It does. It does. Now, the interesting thing is that, you have RGGI and now you have the Renewable Energy Standard, and we might have a federal one. So we need to be able to cost all of these things and layer them all up. But this is in addition to the implementation of RGGI. RGGI is an interesting animal. We also have one in the West Coast. We have different partnerships. And there's a tremendous concern on behalf of many governors on the ability of the states to actually meet these ambitious targets. And do we have the technologies to actually meet these targets? And the bottom line, I think, goes back to the toolbox. Is our toolbox full to meet some of these targets? I'm not going to argue, as I told Senator Lieberman, I'm not going to argue with your targets and timetables. I'm going to argue with your toolbox. Do you have the right tools in there to meet your targets and timetables? And then you have to decide whether these are the appropriate cost or not. And I think we don't have all the technologies we need. We can't get nuclear power out the door. We're going to have nuclear power if we're going to meet the great expansion of electricity demand and climate change goals. We don't have that coming. We don't have and haven't proved out at scale carbon capture and sequestration. If we're serious about it, then we got to prove it out and put the money there and actually make sure this works. Because if it doesn't work, we got to have plan B, C, and D. And we don't have any of those yet. So I think, when we look at it, why are we layering? You look at RGGI and then you look at the national, and then we're talking about layering on top of, and I had this discussion with Congressman Markey on Friday. I said, if you inside his bill was not only the climate piece and the targets and timetables, but it was also a renewable energy standard. I said, so what you're saying is that you're relying on the market, but I'm going to tell you how you have to meet it. So it's not really a market mechanism. You have to meet it with wind and solar. Your reductions have to be met with wind and solar. That is what I'm telling you to do. And that's not going to be well received in the business community because it's going to raise the costs of energy. And so we have to, be thoughtful. If we're going to rely on the market, rely on the market. Let's not rely on multiple, and triplicate mandates.
Finally, what is the impact, if any, of the current health care reform on companies' reluctance to hire?
Oh, that's a great question. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago with a senior administration official who was quite upset, and shaking his finger at me. Why aren't your companies hiring? We've done everything you wanted, all this stimulus. I said, well, we didn't ask for the stimulus, but what is going on, and why is everybody sitting on their capital? And I said, you've got to take a step back. Here they are, which is why I asked that question of, in the beginning of who knows what their health care costs are going to be. The health care costs for a board of directors, if I'm the president and I come into my board and I say, I got a great plan, I got a great project, I want to invest, I want to hire 100 people. And the board goes, okay, well, let's hear that sounds like a good project, but let's figure out, have you done the cost model yet? Have you done the business model? Well, sort of. Well, what are your health care costs going to be? Well, we haven't figured that out yet. All right, well, what's our access to credit? What's credit cost? What's my credit cost going to be because of financial re-regulation? What's my cost of capital going to be? Well, we don't know yet. Okay, well, what's our tax liability look like? Well, we don't know yet. No board of directors is giving the go-ahead, for big projects until some of these unknowns are known. And so we certainly are seeing a reluctance to hire, not just based on healthcare, but healthcare as a component to not being able to see a little bit downfield to say, what does my business model need to look like? And that lack of clarity, that inability to see and know is certainly keeping a lot of capital, trillions of dollars of capital, and the jobs that go along with that on the sidelines. And that, unfortunately, is not a recipe for economic recovery at this point. I think you'll see, the regulations to implement healthcare, of which there are hundreds and hundreds to come, probably an opportunity for us to improve. I don't ever think, I know a lot of people are running on tickets that they're going to repeal healthcare. I'm not sure that will happen in the next couple of years, but at least through the regulatory process, we might be able to improve it. But that means it will still be a drawn-out process. So it's a catch-22. You want to improve it, but that means it takes longer, which means there's less certainty. You get the hamster on the habit trail going like this. So it's having an impact. There is no doubt. All of this uncertainty, I think, is the key word for the business community, is they can't see downfield right now. And that's not happening in many other parts of the world.